Welcome to Sage at Kapiolani Community College. In this video, we'll take a look at the notes for processing your general ledger. First thing to notice about general ledger is this is the core of the accounting system. So the reports module is particularly important because that's how you get information back out of it. The financial reports falls under general ledger and the reports menu item. And it pops up in 3 successive windows for each of the 3 financial statements, or you can check off for selecting only one report. Also, other places where you can find your information: general ledger trial balance, general ledger detail report, and then if you want it by the module that it was imported in from or the special journal that was set up for it, general ledger detail by source report. Also, you can always do a one-off check of an account and transactions in that account by going to General Ledger and then Main and Account Maintenance and clicking on the Transaction tab. You can use that to drill down into the details of the transactions you see listed there. The audit trail is quite firm in Sage, and any transaction that has been entered has to be updated by the end of the period, or your general journal entry will be considered to be still in process, and the system won't let you end. So you have to consciously post things to make sure that they're cleared out, and even deleted transactions have to be posted. So if you entered something and then decided to delete it, it's still created a record. So this would prevent your period end if you don't do the update first. Source journal maintenance. This is a place to set up special system and user created code, special user created codes that give you the ability to identify certain categories of your journal entries. So it's kind of like the old manual journals used to be, where you can sort similar transactions into buckets and use that to look up things and track types of activities and entries. So the codes that are already there and created by the system tell what function and what subsystem the entry would have come from. And you can find these all in a table that's in Processing General Ledger Appendix B. The user-created codes that they have you do at the very beginning of the chapter can be any unique 2 alphanumeric character combo, and has to be unique. And you create that or edit it by using source journal maintenance. So types of source journals: we have financial journals, which is what you would sort of expect. We also have non-financial journals that accept numbers that represent any statistic we want to track, kind of like a one-sided entry. So examples of non-financial journals would be sales per square foot in a retail store, or number of employees you have in a department, which is what gets used in our book, standard overhead dollar amounts for something, direct and indirect labor hours for a business for a period of time, clients that are served by a nonprofit agency's project, all sorts of things like that. So they are a way to register in your system statistics about things that are typically not dollar amounts. Now, the core of General Ledger is making general journal entries or viewing entries that have been made by the system. And in making general journal entries, when we go directly to GL to make an entry, we switch on and use what's known as batch posting. So you can take any number of journal entries you want, you have them grouped, and they all get posted at one time. So all the entries in each batch are kept together in kind of a bucket or a batch, and they're handled separately from other batches. Now supervisors can merge these, but typically they're retained separately. So you could have multiple users doing the same kind of work at the same time, and the users could make a batch in size that they would like to have it for control purposes, do things like determine the total of the batch before inputting it to make sure that the actual input work comes out to be the same, like that, same kind of thing. Now, a private batch means that only a certain user or their supervisor can work on entries in that batch. And the batch number itself doesn't mean anything. So if you get assigned a new batch number because you abandoned an old one, don't worry about batch numbers. Document numbers do matter because you'd like them to kind of match the textbook so you can check things later. But batch numbers don't really matter. So when you're inputting, you go to the header tab and you input basic information there, then go to the lines tab to do your distribution, and you can play around with primary and secondary grids on the line tab. And there'll be batch number and list entry buttons to work with, and a copy from button when you're doing standard journal entries, journal entry history and allocation journal entries. So the basic idea or the basic routine is you do your input, then you print, you check your errors, and then you update. So you have to print the journal. If that's your chance to check your work thoroughly and change anything you may need to change. And if you go there to print a journal and you see the message the whatever journal entry files are empty, that means that you have not either have not input, or if you know I'm positive I input, then go check do a account maintenance check and go look at one of the accounts that's affected, transactions. If your number is in there, you can no longer get the input journal, and you can no longer change it. The only way you can change the dollars is to go and do a correcting entry of some kind. So that must mean that you've already done the update. So standard journal entries are saved journal entries that you're likely to use again and again, and you associate them with a particular source journal, and you pick the accounts you want to debit and credit, and they're pretty much always the same, but you can change the amounts. So like double declining balance depreciation, uh, expiration of insurance or rent, prepaid insurance or rent, those things might change from time to time. Interest on a loan. Um, so the operator should maintain some kind of system of tracking this outside of the Sage system, because they have to know if they've done this kind of processing. The system won't remind you that you need to be doing it. So there are 3 stages of processing for this. You create it, then when you need it, you recall it and you input the amounts. And so creation, you just create it and then you save it and modify it and save it if you need to. And then you recall it. You say copy from standard journal, and you input your dollar amounts. And then same as before, you print the journal, check your work thoroughly, make sure you have whatever you want, and then when you believe it's correct, you go ahead and update it. But check it first while you can still easily fix your errors. Everything after that requires lots more work. So one of the things they do in this chapter, which may or may not be important depending on the kind of company you work with, is defining and using allocations. And allocations are just entries that you use to distribute amounts or redistribute amounts between accounts based on one factor or another. You can do them in cycles, or you can do them manually. Um, and they need a source account on their header and a destination account on the lines area, so that and the selection of the type of entry that you make determines how the allocation will be made. And it kind of gives you sort of like a test by printing your journal. You can see what it is you're going to get when you try the journal. So first you define this allocation. So you fill in the factors and then you accept them and you modify it and accept it if you need to change things. And you have these several allocation methods. You can do flat percents. You can do a proportion of some other dollar number typically, or you can do basis, and that's based on a third element. So that's what they have you do some of in this chapter. That's the more complicated part. Now, the allocation cycles you have to choose from or period. You can do each period, like once every 12 months, or if you have 13 periods, you can do it then. Some companies will have a 5 week routine where their months don't end at the end of a month, they end at the end of those weekly periods. So you'd have 4 of these cycles per year, each one being 13 weeks. That's 4 times 13. That's exactly 52 weeks for a year. So you get exactly the right number of days in the year, but dates would keep changing all the time. You can do quarterly, and you can do allocation cycle, or you can do annual. And manual is when you say you want to do it on demand. So what you do is you recall it when you want to use it, and or you do a general ledger function, either a period end or a general ledger. And then if it's period end, you do allocation selection, and you can look and see what it is it's going to grab and allocate, and make sure that those are the things you want to be allocating. And if you don't like what it's done, then you go ahead and clear the selection and try it again. So that's your best place to change things, because at that point you're getting ready to actually do the update. So you can clear it, redefine the allocations you want, and then select again. So you're letting the system select for you. Or you can do a general journal entry and you copy from an allocation, and you can change the allocation source amount, but you can't change where it's going to. And in some cases, you might have rounding errors. In that case, you would need to change your source amount and do some other kind of entry to get rid of the missing penny or whatever the problem is. So you also, again, like before, print check your errors before updating, and this is the best time to change things. You can't really change it after it's posted. It's done deal by then. So when you post general journal entries, you print your general journal, you review that, you go back, compare it with your data. It should all be okay before you go ahead and update. So you don't update until you're sure it's okay. And the same rules apply as above. And you can update one batch or you can update all of your batches, depends what it is your intention is at this time. One more kind of an entry here that we want to look at, or two more recurring journal entries. Those are kind of like standard journal entries, but both the account numbers and the amounts are saved. So you can't change the amount without changing the actual saved entry. And you define the cycle, so you make up your own name for the cycle, and you set up a start and a stop date function. And these things will go ahead and recur in the frequency that you've set up. So you fill in the factors you want, you accept, you modify and accept it if you need to change it, give it a name, enter in the JE and amounts, and then select the cycle and the start date and the stop date. And then when you're ready to use it, you can recall that and decide to post or not post at that time. And again, check your work before updating. Now you can enter and post transaction journal entries, which are not the same thing as a regular journal entry. These guys are made for bulk entry of transactions, like say deposits for a month. And then all the reasons for the deposits may be in sales or loans payable or something like that. So you would just, every entry would be assumed to be a debit to say the cash account, and you decide what all the credits are and input, select the accounts that are getting credited and the dollar amounts that go with them. So that single account, the one that you're assumed to be making all the entries into, is called the offset account. And typically you use this for bulk entry of bank transactions, also transfers and adjustments, cash receipts, cash disbursements if you're not using accounts payable and accounts receivable. And this guy integrates with bank reconciliation. So General Ledger is the only module where data interchange happens between General Ledger and Bank Rec and General Ledger. Most others only have like a one direction information flow. So most of your common journals are already formatted. You can do some formatting changes, and only that you did during the entry of transaction will be saved. And offset account. Your offset account, if the transaction. So here's where you're setting up how you want to do the input. So in the course of setting it up, if you check the transaction total box in the format screen when you're setting up the format, then you have to have a control total. In other words, you have to know what your total of this input session is going to be. And that would be in the offset account. That's the amount that you're going to post the offset account. And that has to agree with the total of the entries in your lines tab. You also have a post deposits and summary checkbox if you want to coordinate with a bank statement. And those can show up in GL otherwise. So posting from other modules happens once in the other module, you say you want to update the general ledger daily transaction register. So each module that feeds dollars into general ledger has its own input sequence for maintaining records within that system, like accounts payable, accounts receivable, inventory management. And then you have a secondary stage of updating to general ledger. And prior to that, you print out what's known as the general ledger daily transaction register and view that and post. So in general ledger itself, you can update the general ledger daily transaction register from all the other modules if you want. Instead of having the operators at that level do it, you as a general ledger person in charge of the general ledger could be the one who decides when those updates happen. So if you're reviewing transactions, go back and see the very first part of these notes, because that tells you the places that you can go to see information about the entries you made. Thanks. Hope this helps. Bye for now.